At issue tonight, question 4. Should certain psychedelics be legal in Massachusetts?
We oppose it because it's for-profit legalization, which would harm the public health.
A doctor actually recommended this psychedelic-assisted therapy with psilocybin, and it changed my life.
Medical professionals and advocates on both sides of this issue weigh in. Plus, 5 days before Election Day, we catch up with 2 high-profile supporters of Vice President Harris, Massachusetts Attorney General Andrea Campbell, and Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. At Issue, Decision 2024 starts now.
Good Wednesday evening and welcome to another live edition of At Issue. We appreciate you joining us tonight. I'm Corey Smith.
And I'm Sue O'Connell. Coming up, my take on Vice President Harris's closing argument last night in Washington. The where and how she delivered that message perhaps was as important as what she said.
Plus, 2 heavy hitters in the Democratic Party are going to join us. Massachusetts Attorney General Andrea Campbell and Matt Pritchard caught up with Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro.
We start with the latest of our series of reports on the Massachusetts ballot questions. Question 4 deals with the legalization and regulation of certain psychedelic drugs.
A lot of gray area in this question. Advocates say the drugs have shown promise in clinical research trials for folks battling everything from opioid use disorder to mental health conditions. But opponents worry that a yes vote could be dangerous.
Once I tried it, I couldn't believe it. I had this moment of clarity, like that I must be onto something here.
Marine Corps veteran and Somerville native Mike Botello struggled with PTSD, health ailments, and drug use after serving in the 1991 Gulf War and the Balkans. He says his life was spiraling out of control when a friend suggested he try psilocybin, more commonly known as magic mushrooms.
Really, it is like a moment of clarity when you do this, but it's something that sticks with you. It's not just a moment. The clarity stays with you.
I wanted to show to my friends.
Botello was one of several veterans speaking out in support of Question 4, which, if approved, would allow 5 psychedelics, psilocybin, psilocin, mescaline, DMT, and ibogaine, to be grown, shared, used at home, and offered by licensed professionals in the clinical setting. And it would also create a commission to regulate those substances. The therapeutic use centers won't open until at least April of 2026, but personal use would be legalized this December, which is a chief concern for some opponents.
For the first 18 months to 2 years, the only thing that you could possibly do is grow at your house. You would be self-medicating. It is dangerous, particularly for the folks that they are saying need it the most.
Dr. Nasir Ghami, president of the Massachusetts Psychiatric Society, is opposed to Question 4.
The psychiatrists and physicians in this state, the majority of whom oppose this question, don't oppose it because of possible medical benefits. We oppose it because it's for-profit legalization, which would harm the public health.
Psychedelics are associated with some substantial harms. Psilocybin and mescaline may trigger adverse reactions for those with pre-existing mental health issues. Ibogaine can cause heart problems, and DMT, which is found in ayahuasca, may have lasting neurological effects on people who take it. Dr. Ghami says that's exactly what happened to one of his patients.
A young lady in her early 20s who took ayahuasca, took it twice, and got it for mild depression, had never been diagnosed or treated before, got very severely depressed, psychotic, delusional hallucinations, hospitalized for 6 months. She became catatonic, couldn't talk, move, eat, or drink, had to get a feeding tube, and eventually improved with electroshock treatment.
I really wanted to make sure that the messaging comes across to the public that should something like this pass, it would offer 2 opportunities that I don't think are currently available.
Dr. Roxanne Sholovar is a psychiatrist who supports Question 4. She's worked on studies looking at psilocybin-assisted therapy for patients with cancer. She supports supervised use, where people who take the psychedelics would be monitored by a trained facilitator. And she believes legalization would help people feel more comfortable discussing their experiences with their doctors.
I have so many patients asking me about psychedelics, like where can I get it? How should I take it safely? But because these substances are illegal and have the significant criminal penalties, both patients and providers like myself are quite limited in how free we can be to not necessarily recommend, but to talk about what it means to do something like this. Those conversations, as well as people being given psychedelics under therapeutic guidance are all happening underground right now. And I think the good thing about question 4 is that it brings these things above ground so they can be talked about in the light.
Dr. Sholovar also said psychedelic-assisted therapy has reawakened the psychiatric community's interest and passion for the mind.
Psychiatry has been so focused on like biology, right? Like biological mechanisms. What are the neurotransmitters? What are the pathways? What goes wrong? What drugs fix it? That we really have lost interest in what goes on inside a person's mind. How do they see themselves? How do they see the world? And I really think that's actually the coolest thing about psychedelic-assisted therapies is it brings that back into the center. It's now about like a treatment that gives people and gives the therapists like a look inside of themselves. And then that look inside themselves becomes part of the story.
Now, we mentioned the gray area here, and it has to deal with the legal concerns. Psychedelics are illegal under federal law, so passing this law would put Massachusetts in conflict with federal law, similar to when recreational cannabis was legalized here back in 2016.
Right, but unlike the marijuana law here, these 5 psychedelics would not be available at retail shops, and adults who are interested in using would need to grow their own or find a person who is willing to share. Those psychedelic therapy centers where people could buy and use the drugs, they wouldn't open until at least April of 2026.
Eliza Dushku Palandjian made her name starring in blockbuster movies and hit TV shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. But the Watertown native has stepped away from Hollywood and has become a prominent proponent of psychedelic-assisted therapy. She and her husband, Peter, joined us to talk about why.
Eliza and Peter, thanks so much for joining us. Eliza, talk to us a little bit about your initial decision to use psilocybin as a treatment.
Sure. I guess you could say I had sort of a lifetime of numbing some of the experiences that I had in my childhood, traumatic experiences particularly. I've been very open about my struggle with addiction and alcoholism, so I was sober, but I was still really suffering, and in particular, right before this treatment, it was the Me Too movement, and I released some details, and I found myself in full-blown PTSD. And I went to some of the leading trauma therapists. I worked with pharmaceuticals. I worked with EMDR, a number of modalities, and nothing was helpful. And a doctor actually recommended this psychedelic-assisted therapy with psilocybin, and it changed my life.
So if I'm not mistaken, you use psilocybin as well as MDMA for your therapy, better known as ecstasy or Molly. Describe how it felt in the moment and what that realization was like when you said, huh, this is working for me.
Yeah. Well, respectfully, I do come here today as more of a behavioral health clinician in training. I did detail my experience in this month's Boston magazine as far as a client and as a patient. It's really a kind of raw thing to talk about over and over, and I felt like I felt like I would be remiss if I left all this pain on the table and then didn't give an update 6 years later about how this treatment had worked for me. But aside from my personal experience, I'm now, a clinical mental health intern. I'm about to finish my master's. I became a psychedelic-assisted therapist, or took a certificate training to do so. And what was most stood out for me about my personal experience was that it became really clear to me that I was going to stop what I was doing and my former career and help bring this to other people.
Peter, what have you noticed in terms of the benefits of these types of therapies?
Yeah, so remember, we're partners, and I went through what Eliza went through to a great extent. And I watched her having trouble releasing out of her body. The body keeps the score, as the book is entitled. And traumas are trapped, whether it's a 10th grade trauma, a sexual trauma, or something that happened to you in Afghanistan is trapped in the body. And I watched with Eliza, who was struggling to release what happened once she kind of came public with it and didn't have the old numbing tools that weren't working for her. I watched just a phenomenal transformation right away, kind of one treatment, as opposed to, and there's definitely a role for SSRIs and pharma, absolutely, especially in acute cases. But if you want to get at root cause, And what's really underlying the trauma, the depression, the PTSD, the brain injury, these medicines we're seeing in studies out of Johns Hopkins and Mass General and Stanford and NYU, et cetera, efficacy rates of above 70%. And we've had no new tools for 40, 50 years in some cases, depending on the afflictions. So I watch it firsthand, and some people say, I've heard Eliza say, the opposition, we're going too fast. I don't think we're going fast enough.
Psilocybin, MDMA, ayahuasca, been around for a long time. People have been using it for a long time. When you talk to the opposition, there is also this level of fears of criminality. People can grow it for their own personal use. They can give it away. They can't necessarily sell it. What do you say to those who feel there's a public safety issue here?
So I respect that. I have 6 children, and there's no part of Eliza I would be leaning into this if it weren't wrapped with safeguards. But that said, it's already decriminalized in 8 communities in Massachusetts, Oregon, Colorado, Washington, D.C. There is no statistical data that says there's an uptick in violence or in vehicular accidents. That's fear-mongering. I respect the fears, and I share them, but I don't like the fear-mongering because it's just there's no data around that. And
also, you can't decriminalize this without the homegrown aspect, because if this is decriminalized, and we know people are going and using these substances now, we know this is a breakthrough treatment for people who have spent perhaps most of their lives suffering. So people are doing it. So where are they going to get it? I mean, that pushes people towards the black market if they can't be growing it at home. That pushes them towards getting unsafe or tainted substances. And also, these are organic substances on this bill. MDMA is actually not on the bill. It's 5 organic substances, plant-based, that have been being used for thousands of years to treat, as rites of passage and treating mental health challenges and recovery. So the idea that people can grow it, they can't sell it, they can't barter with it. There's no retail stores. Yeah. It's still criminal. It's much safer than I feel the opposition is trying to persuade people to believe.
Yeah, in fact, there's an irony to it because they end, again, I respect the fears and concerns, but they end one of the attack ads with a web link to a problem somewhere else in the country around it. Our legalizing it with the language as drafted will actually make it not possible for us to buy from Canada, and that's still going to be criminal. So this is a way for Massachusetts to control it, and it's already going on. I'd rather have those controls in place.
That was Eliza Dushku Palandjian and her husband Peter Palandjian saying why they are yes on question 4. Now, we should point out opponents to question 4 talk about that a good deal of financial support for the yes side comes from people with ties to private equity. So you talk about some of the outside money coming into these ballot questions. It is worth noting that Eliza donated $100,000 of her own money to the yes side. So for more on all the ballot questions, scan the QR code on your screen. That's going to take you to our website, NBC10Boston.com, and there we have a comprehensive guide on all 5 questions. All right, up next, we're going to get Sue's take on the presidential race.
Any guesses as to who former President Trump will put in charge of our public health agencies if he gets elected? It's a name we're all familiar with, but one you might not expect. Plus, my take on the vice president's closing argument at the Ellipse.
And we're going to hear from 2 Democratic heavy hitters. Our Matt Pritchard goes one-on-one with Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, and Massachusetts Attorney General Andrea Campbell joins us live on the Harris campaign. Next. We are back, and this is a live look at former President Donald Trump at a rally in Green Bay, Wisconsin. He's been in the state much of the day. You see him there wearing a reflective vest. That is, of course, a nod to former President Biden's comments about garbage that have recently been in the news the last 24 hours or so, but also harkens back to Trump's own comments about, or the Trump comedian at a rally at MSG about the garbage in Puerto Rico. You know the story, so that is why he is wearing that vest. But there was another big rally last night, and that was Kamala Harris's rally in D.C. We're going to talk about that with Sue, but first, listen to this.
Unlike Donald Trump, I don't believe people who disagree with me are the enemy.
So that was Vice President Harris making her closing argument to the American people from the very spot where Donald Trump spoke on January 6th. Before the Capitol riot. Sue, what did you make of her speech?
You know, Corey, it's an amazing campaign. This whole situation is just absolutely unlike anything else. Here we have the Vice President of the United States, been serving for 4 years. She is the nominee for the Democratic to be president. We are just days away from the voting ending, and Kamala Harris took the opportunity to introduce herself to Americans who may not know who she is, because it has been such a short period of time that she has been running. And as vice president, often people don't know what the heck you're doing, no matter who you are. So I think she had a very big lift she had to do here, introduce herself. We talked yesterday about whether or not she was going to cite where she was directly, that this is where the scene of the crime, as many people have said, where Trump gave his address and people marched onto the Capitol. She did do that explicitly, and then she hit all the points. Yeah. She talked about policy. She talked about her background. I think it was it was a great infomercial I sent earlier, and I don't mean that in any derogatory way.
All right, we'll see whether it matters come Election Day. Meantime, we mentioned former President Donald Trump in Green Bay, Wisconsin tonight, and there were reports that he allegedly promised a major role in his administration to that man, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. In a Zoom call with supporters, Kennedy said that Trump had promised him control of public health agencies. Think Health and Human Services, the CDC, the FDA, NIH. Kennedy is a lawyer with no professional background in medicine, science, or public health, but he has gained a lot of attention for speaking out against COVID vaccines and vaccines in general. Sue, any thoughts on that?
So besides the fact that he is completely inexperienced and unqualified for either one of those positions, I will say something nice about him in that he is a creative thinker. He's a very smart person. He's very intelligent. And bringing a fresh approach to some bureaucracies is not a bad thing. However, knowing what we know about RFK Jr. and what he's willing to trade off, do we want him in charge of agriculture when we may not be getting the vaccines that we need? So it's a bad idea. I'm glad he told us about it.
All right, we'll see what happens there. All right, when it comes to the presidential race, we know New Hampshire not really mentioned that much anymore as a battleground state. But that isn't keeping high-profile surrogates from stopping through to cement voter support.
NBC10 political reporter Matt Pritchard is in Lebanon, New Hampshire, where he spoke one-on-one with Pennsylvania's Governor Josh Shapiro.
Corey, Sue, Shapiro's goals here really are twofold. On the one hand, he's trying to tie up loose ends in states across the country while simultaneously trying to ensure that Pennsylvania's 19 electoral votes wind up going for Kamala Harris. 6 days remain to campaign, and no stone is being left unturned. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro shouldering a loaded schedule, making multiple stops in New Hampshire, stumping for Kamala Harris and gubernatorial candidate Joyce Craig.
We feel good about where things are going, but you got to run through the tape here in New Hampshire.
So those 4 electoral votes, that really could make a difference at the end.
Absolutely.
And New Hampshire seems to still be a priority for the Harris campaign.
Well, you got a long few days ahead of you.
New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey have passed through in recent weeks, a play political analysts say is smart strategy.
This is an enthusiasm build for Democrats in New Hampshire. The idea here is we can win this thing if all of our people turn out.
With potential ripple effects down ballot.
It really could influence state House and Senate races. It could influence executive council races. It could be a big day for Democrats.
Now, that said, it's been an up and down week for the Harris campaign, first seizing on comments from a Trump rally comedian.
There's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
But having to respond after President Biden seemed to counter by disparaging Trump supporters.
The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters.
Do you feel like he just misspoke here? How do you view the comment?
Well, look, I was clear in my comments. That's not a way I would ever speak about a fellow Pennsylvanian or a fellow American. But the focus here is not on Joe Biden. It needs to be on the difference between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump.
Now, pivoting to Pennsylvania and concerns from Donald Trump that voting issues are already cropping up. In Lancaster, as well as in York counties, what do you make of the claims that he's making?
The people who are working on this election, Republican and Democratic clerks alike, they're doing an outstanding job. Donald Trump keeps trying to do what he did back in 2020, which is throw gasoline on a fire, make up all kinds of noise, create chaos, and undermine people's faith in our system.
You're, going back to Pennsylvania right after this. That is a state that could decide this election. What's your sense of where things are headed in her home state?
It's a toss-up, right? It's a close race. We're not afraid of that because in Pennsylvania, of course, the last two races have come down to less than a point. But we're not worried about it. We are working.
And Shapiro is far from the last high-profile surrogate we will see here in New Hampshire in the campaign's final days. To round out the week, we expect former President Bill Clinton to make his way to New Hampshire. Reporting for At Issue, I'm Matt Pritchard.
All right, another high-profile Democrat who has been busy campaigning for the Harris-Walz ticket is Massachusetts Attorney General Andrea Joy Campbell. And the Attorney General was kind enough to join us tonight. Thank you so much for being back on At Issue, Attorney General.
Delighted to be here with you all.
All right, Attorney General, where have you been? What have you heard from supporters or maybe people who are not that fond of the vice president? Or how many open-minded people are you finding?
I have been crisscrossing not just Massachusetts, of course, but also I've been in New Hampshire, Michigan, North Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania very soon. And it's, all hands on deck. This is going to be a close election. And not only do I believe in the vice president and her ability to bring people together in this very divisive time, which she demonstrated yesterday and the day before that. When she's getting out on the trail, it is about unity. It is about looking forward. It is about love and hope and joy. And that's what people need in this moment in time. It's also about the issues that matter the most: protecting the rule of law, our democracy and democratic institutions, access to reproductive health care, preventing gun violence, junk fees, consumer protection. So for me, this is not just about doing the work here in Massachusetts. We need a partner in that White House that gets it and will roll up her sleeves to work in partnership with us. So I'm doing everything I can to support people up and down the ballot, but most importantly, her, and to get people out to vote.
Speaking of that, where you can't see it, but we've been showing photos of you on the trail, and one of them appears to be you and a young gentleman door knocking. I want to talk about that ground game because in a toss-up state like, for instance, a Pennsylvania, the get out the vote effort could be make or break. What is your sense of the get out the vote effort for the Harris campaign?
It's critical, and I enjoyed being out there door knocking. This was in North Carolina. In Concord, North Carolina, not to be confused with Concord, Massachusetts. What I loved about this particular organizer and the work they're doing every day is they have been out there on the ground doing the work. When cameras aren't showing up, they're out there. They are door knocking, they're connecting with voters, and they're connecting with folks across party affiliations. And so I think that's important too. So whether folks are independents or even some Republicans, right? She is building a camp that opens up a camp for everyone to be a part of. And I think that is really important in this moment in time, really focusing on people who have ever felt left out or left behind and saying, you too can be a part of what we're trying to create. She cares about the issues they're facing. She cares about their family. She cares about their bottom line, the kitchen table issues. And she has real plans, not concepts of plans, but real plans to help them. So I was out there door knocking along with so many others to really ensure people get out early if they can, and most importantly, on Tuesday of next week.
I have said for decades that it's very hard for attorneys general to sometimes move on to be governor because you're law enforcement, and sometimes it's a difficulty. Certainly it was a challenge that VP Harris had when she ran the first time. Obviously, I've been proven wrong by Maura Healey, among others. What are you hearing? Are you seeing that her law enforcement background is actually an asset for her in this race in a way that it wasn't before?
It absolutely is an asset for several reasons. One is she is the only candidate in this race that has dedicated her entire professional career to public service. Obviously, starting off as a district attorney and then serving as attorney general, senator, of course, vice president. She has always been for the people, about the people, and serving the people. And that can't be discounted. She's also a lawyer. And she believes in fighting on behalf of folks for justice, fighting for those folks who have ever felt like government wasn't on their side or didn't serve them well, and ensuring that government and governmental agencies deliver for them on all of the issues they care about. She has also cared deeply about children. I'm a mom of 2 boys, and I've been stressing, I don't care what job you're in. At the end of the day, all of us show up to work to ensure that the next generation does better than the last. She has always done the work with that mindset of ensuring that children, our children, have access to a college education, can actually accomplish the American dream, can reach for their dreams, which is significantly important. And I think this public safety issue that we have been talking about in broad strokes across the country, we want people to feel safe. I want someone who's going to take on hate and the uptick in violence and hate we're seeing in our communities. She has done that work for decades. That won't change. If anything, now we have to do our part to encourage folks to get out to vote, to remind them what's at stake, and to tell them this is indeed the most important election of our lifetime.
All right. Attorney General Andrea Joy Campbell, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We appreciate it. That's going to do it for this live edition of At Issue. Tomorrow night, we take a closer look at Question 5 on the ballot. So join us for that. For Sue O'Connell, I'm Corey Smith. We'll see you tomorrow night.